NFPA 496 does not require the use of NEMA-rated enclosures for purged and pressurized systems. However, some vendors suggest using NEMA 4 or NEMA 12 enclosures as a starting point. This recommendation likely stems from the fact that NEMA 4 and NEMA 12 enclosures are designed to be dust-tight and water-resistant, which are important characteristics for purged and pressurized systems. However, building your own purged and pressurized enclosure is permissible as long as it meets the requirements outlined in NFPA 496. To ensure the safety and effectiveness of your enclosure, it is important to adhere to the guidelines provided by NFPA 496. Consulting with a qualified professional is also advised if you have any questions or concerns. Let's delve into the details of purged and pressurized enclosures and what factors to consider when deciding whether to build your own or opt for a commercially available NEMA-rated enclosure. Purging and pressurization are protection methods used in hazardous locations to prevent flammable gases, vapors, dust, or fibers from entering an enclosure containing electrical equipment. This method essentially creates a safe environment within the enclosure, reducing the risk of explosion or fire. NFPA 496, the standard for purged and pressurized enclosures for electrical equipment, provides detailed requirements for the design, installation, and operation of these systems. When considering building your own enclosure, it's crucial to understand the key aspects of NFPA 496. Firstly, the standard specifies different types of purging and pressurization systems, each with its own set of requirements. These types are generally categorized based on the level of protection they provide and the conditions under which they are used. Secondly, NFPA 496 outlines the requirements for the enclosure itself, including its construction, materials, and ability to maintain pressure. While it doesn't explicitly mandate NEMA ratings, it does specify performance criteria that the enclosure must meet. Thirdly, the standard covers the purging system, including the type of purge gas, the flow rate, and the duration of the purge. It also addresses the pressurization system, including the pressure level, the pressure monitoring system, and the alarm system. Fourthly, NFPA 496 addresses the installation and maintenance requirements for the entire system. This includes the location of the enclosure, the wiring methods, and the periodic inspection and testing procedures. Now let's consider the advantages and disadvantages of building your own enclosure versus using a NEMA-rated enclosure. Building your own enclosure can offer several advantages. Firstly, it can be more cost-effective, especially if you have the necessary skills and resources. Secondly, it allows for greater customization to meet your specific needs. Thirdly, it can provide a better understanding of the system, which can be helpful for maintenance and troubleshooting. However, building your own enclosure also has some disadvantages. Firstly, it requires a significant amount of engineering expertise to ensure that the enclosure meets all the requirements of NFPA 496. Secondly, it can be time-consuming to design, fabricate, and test the enclosure. Thirdly, it may be difficult to obtain the necessary certifications for the enclosure. On the other hand, using a NEMA-rated enclosure offers several advantages. Firstly, it is a pre-engineered and tested solution that is designed to meet specific environmental conditions. Secondly, it is readily available from a variety of vendors. Thirdly, it is typically certified to meet relevant standards such as UL or CSA. However, using a NEMA-rated enclosure also has some disadvantages. Firstly, it can be more expensive than building your own enclosure. Secondly, it may not be perfectly suited to your specific needs. Thirdly, it may not provide as much understanding of the system. When deciding whether to build your own enclosure or use an NEMA-rated enclosure, it is important to carefully consider all of these factors. If you have the necessary expertise and resources, and if you need a highly customized solution, then building your own enclosure may be the best option. However, if you lack the necessary expertise or resources, or if you need a readily available and certified solution, then using a NEMA-rated enclosure may be the better choice. Regardless of which option you choose, it is essential to ensure that the enclosure meets all the requirements of NFPA 496. This includes the enclosure's ability to withstand the internal pressure, its resistance to environmental factors such as dust and water, and its ability to prevent the entry of flammable substances. Remember that even if NFPA 496 doesn't explicitly require a NEMA rating, the performance requirements effectively necessitate a robust enclosure. The NEMA rating system provides a convenient way to specify the level of protection an enclosure offers against various environmental conditions. For example, a NEMA 4 enclosure is designed to be watertight and dust-tight, while a NEMA 12 enclosure is designed to be dust-tight and resistant to dripping non-corrosive liquids. When selecting a NEMA-rated enclosure, it is important to choose one that is appropriate for the specific environment in which it will be used. In addition to the enclosure itself, it is also important to consider the purging and pressurization system. The purging system must be capable of effectively removing any flammable substances from the enclosure before it is energized. The pressurization system must be capable of maintaining a positive pressure within the enclosure to prevent the entry of flammable substances. The purge gas should be compatible with the materials inside the enclosure and the surrounding environment. Nitrogen and clean, dry air are common choices. The flow rate and duration of the purge must be sufficient to reduce the concentration of any flammable substances to a safe level. The pressure level should be high enough to prevent the entry of flammable substances, but not so high as to damage the enclosure or its components. The pressure monitoring system should provide a reliable indication of the pressure within the enclosure. The alarm system should provide an audible and visual indication if the pressure falls below a safe level. It is also important to consider the installation and maintenance requirements for the entire system. The enclosure should be located in a well-ventilated area, away from any potential sources of flammable substances. The wiring method should be appropriate for the hazardous location. Periodic inspection and testing should be performed to ensure that the system is operating properly. The frequency of these inspections and tests will depend on the specific application and the requirements of NFPA 496. Keep in mind that NFPA 496 is a complex standard, and it is important to have a thorough understanding of its requirements before designing, installing, or operating a purged and pressurized enclosure system. Consulting with a qualified professional is always a good idea, especially if you are not familiar with the standard. A qualified professional can help you to select the appropriate enclosure and purging and pressurization system for your specific application, and they can also help you to ensure that the system is installed and maintained properly. The goal is to create a safe and reliable system that protects electrical equipment from the hazards of flammable substances. Moreover, while vendors commonly recommend NEMA 4 or 12 enclosures, understand why they make this recommendation. These enclosures offer a good balance of protection against dust, water, and other environmental factors, making them suitable for many industrial applications. However, if your specific application requires a higher level of protection, such as protection against corrosive substances or extreme temperatures, you may need to consider a different type of enclosure. It's also worth noting that some applications may not require the level of protection offered by a NEMA 4 or 12 enclosure. In such cases, a less expensive enclosure with a lower NEMA rating may be sufficient. Ultimately, the best approach is to carefully assess the specific requirements of your application and to select an enclosure that meets those requirements. Don't simply assume that a NEMA 4 or 12 enclosure is always the best choice. Also, be aware of the potential for confusion regarding NEMA ratings. The NEMA rating system is based on voluntary standards developed by the National Electrical Manufacturers Association. While these standards are widely recognized and respected, they are not legally binding unless they are incorporated into a code or regulation. This means that manufacturers are not required to have their enclosures tested and certified to NEMA standards. However, many manufacturers choose to do so in order to demonstrate the quality and performance of their product. When evaluating NEMA-rated enclosures, it is important to look for enclosures that have been tested and certified by a recognized third-party testing laboratory, such as UL or CSA. These laboratories provide independent verification that the enclosure meets the requirements of the NEMA standard. In addition to NEMA ratings, there are other types of enclosure ratings that you may encounter, such as IP ratings. IP ratings are based on international standards developed by the International Electrotechnical Commission. IP ratings provide a similar type of information as NEMA ratings, but they use a different numbering system. For example, an I-65 enclosure is similar to a NEMA 4 enclosure, providing protection against dust and water. When comparing NEMA and IP ratings, it is important to understand the differences between the two systems. A conversion chart can be helpful in comparing the ratings. However, it is always best to consult the specific requirements of your application and to select an enclosure that meets those requirements, regardless of the rating system used. In conclusion, while NFPA 496 doesn't explicitly mandate NEMA-rated enclosures, the performance requirements and the desire for robust protection often lead to the selection of NEMA 4 or 12 enclosures. When building your own enclosure, ensure it meets all NFPA 496 requirements. Carefully consider the advantages and disadvantages of building your own versus using a pre-rated enclosure. A thorough understanding of NFPA 496 and the specific requirements of your application is essential for ensuring safety and reliability. Always consult with a qualified professional if you have any questions or concerns.